We survived 2020 and made it to 2021. Happy New Year, y'all! Hey crafters, my name is Amanda. You are watching Crafters Autonomous, where I give you the knowledge and skills you need to craft it yourself. So yes, it is a new year, and I'm not big into New Year's resolutions, but I do like to get organized, and the new year is the perfect time to do so. So today's project is a DIY that will help you get organized. We're going to making the simple, what I'm calling a memo board. This board can help you get organized. You can use it as a vision board, or you can just use it as a piece of decoration. So let's get crafting. So let's gather our materials. First off, we need a piece of styrofoam. I believe this type of styrofoam is called polystyrene. This is basically the thick styrofoam that doesn't bend, it doesn't really compress much. You can find this at hardware stores or craft stores, but this is used a lot in packaging, so you might be able to save a leftover piece. I held on to this piece from a meal delivery box. So get whatever size you want. Mine's probably about like 14 by 19 inches, somewhere in that range. And then we're gonna take this and wrap it in fabric. I found this random fabric. This is what I'm going to be using. We're going to use some ribbon to add some decorative details, and it'll also be a place to hold note cards or pictures. This is basic textured, I believe it's called grow grain ribbon. I'm going to add 5 little buttons. And then last of all, we need something to add a little bit of thickness, a little bit of plushness, so we can hold pictures between the ribbon and the fabric. Lots of options for that. You can pick up just a sheet of soft, squishy styrofoam that will fit on your board. What I'm going to be using is some leftover quilt batting. You could also use something like an old towel. And then to assemble it all together, I'm going to use a basic handheld stapler. We're going to use it kind of like a staple gun. Now be very careful if you do this. I'm not liable if you hurt yourself doing this, but most of these staplers, you can open them up where you have the staple part up here, and then we can just press down almost like you would for a staple gun, and it goes right into our foam. So before you start the project, I would test out your stapler to make sure that it will work. But once you've got your materials, then we can start assembling. First off, I'm going to get a piece of quilt batting that is big enough for my piece here. I think I'm gonna do just 1 layer of the quilt batting. You can double it up if you think you need it to be a little bit thicker. I'll just tear off a little piece to go in the corner here. And you do want enough to have overlap around the edges. Once you've got your quilt batting size down, it's time to cut out a piece of fabric. Now this piece might be just wide enough to go around, or I might have to cut out an entirely new piece, but I think it's gonna be just big enough for me. You want your fabric wide enough that if we flip it over, we can pull the fabric to the back on both sides. And we're gonna call this good enough. This is just barely wide enough for me, but of course, you can leave a wider margin to make this project easier. Let me come down here and trim off my excess fabric. And I'm gonna leave plenty of excess so I can easily overlap it. And now that we've got our pieces cut out, it's time to line everything up and attach it all together. So I like to start with my fabric face down. And you of course can iron this first. I'm kind of lazy, so I'm not going to, but it would help. And then center your piece of batting, or if you're using a towel or whatever you decided to use for this project. And then add your piece of styrofoam. And to make sure it's centered, pull on your fabric on both sides and make sure you have enough all the way down to wrap it around. Make sure you have enough at your ends. And then once it's lined up, it's time to start stapling it into place. I'm gonna start on one side. And on your first side, your goal is to just keep it even. So mine has a nice gingham pattern, so it's pretty simple to keep it lined up. Now that side 1 is attached, we're going to repeat on side 2. I'm going to start at one end, pull up a bunch of the tension. Again, keep your fingers out of the way and staple. Now if you pull too tight, because these aren't super long staples, your staples might pop out, so you might have to play around with the tension. Now if you find your staples don't want to hold and go in on the back, you can also do staples along the side and then add some kind of trim to cover up those staples. Now I'm going to go to the ends and repeat the process of stapling, and I will just fold the corners under however I want them to look. I'll probably just do a little, kind of like folding a Christmas present kind of look. One more side. So we've stapled around all our edges, and now when we flip it over, our fabric is nicely attached. So now it's time to add the ribbon, and I'm going to use this green because I ran out of my other color. So I'm gonna run the ribbon along here. Of course, I'm gonna trim this all. One coming along here, kind of like that. We're gonna trim this down so it's not gonna look so crazy. So let's cut our pieces of ribbon. My first piece needs to be able to go from the underside across the front at a diagonal and under this side. I cut it right about here. That's my first piece. My second piece is gonna go across this way, so I'm just gonna measure it off my first piece of ribbon. And this is not at all an exact science. Those are my two big pieces, and then we need to do a little bit of measuring actually, because we're gonna come from the center of one side to the center of the other. I'm just kind of roughing this, and I'm leaving plenty of excess, and I'm gonna cut out 4 pieces to this length. So I'll got these long ones attached first. And again, we're using the stapler. Now I'm at the opposite end, pulling out the slack and stapling it in place. Gonna repeat with my next long piece and attach out the opposite corner. Now we need to line up these pieces. I am going to do some measuring on the back for this. So I'm going to measure along the bottom. It's about 19.5 inches wide for me. So that'll be 9 3/4. And if you're not sure, you can just measure 9 3/4. Yep, that's the right amount. Mark on the opposite side as well. And then the short size, it's like 13 3/4. So that's gonna be fun to divide. And do 6 3/4. So now let me grab my first piece. And what we want to do is, you might think, okay, I'm gonna overlap it right there. But if we overlap it there, when we look on the front, we're shifted off to the side. So what we want to make sure is the piece along this edge here lines up with our mark. That's what we want lining up there. And then once you've got it lined up, it's time to staple it in place. I like to start by doing one staple at each end and then flipping to the front to make sure it's lined up well. And so it should line up pretty close to even with the center crisscross spot there. And that does, so we're gonna keep going and staple these down some more and then add our next pieces. So I do my second one, I'm not gonna overlap them all the way, I'm gonna bring it so that way they kind of meet right here on the top. Again, staple one up there, staple one down here, and then we will check. All right, I'm gonna reposition these a little bit maybe. Good news is the staples come out pretty easy if you just pull straight up. There we go, that looks a little better. Repeat on my last 2 pieces. Now these are still pretty loose, so at each of these intersections, I've got 5 of them here, I'm gonna staple it down and then cover it with a button. Personally, I think this turns out cuter if you use narrower ribbon and then buttons that completely cover the intersection, but I'm working with what I've got here since my other ribbon failed on me. But by adding these staples in, it's going to add a little more tension, so when you slide papers and things behind here, it'll hold it in place better. Be pretty careful where I line this up. There we go. One of these at each of these crisscrosses. And now all we have to do is let the glue dry and then our memo board will be complete. Now I am gonna show you one more thing while I let this dry. Because our staples aren't super long, the ribbon might pop up a little bit, and even once we glue everything down, it might pop up a little bit, and we really wanna keep that tension so it'll hold pictures and things really well. So another option is to use little sewing pins, and you can just run it down through either side of your button. And of course, you need to use sewing pins that won't go through all the way to the back side. If they do go all the way through to the back side, then you need to trim them off, but mine are just short enough to not go all the way through. I like the look with the buttons open the best, but this is another option if you find that you need to put a little bit more tension in the ribbons and in your cross pieces. And as I wrap this up here, this should go without saying, but obviously this project is not something you'd want in a little kid's bedroom just because these staples will come out of the styrofoam pretty easily. This is more a piece of decoration, or if you don't have kids in the house anymore, then it would work great, but this isn't something that you'd want to put in a little kid's room because the pins could pop out or the staples could pop out and be just a health and choking hazard. And here is the finished project. We can add pictures, little note cards in there, whatever you want to add to this project. If you want to make this project a little sturdier, 2 things you can do is to use a real staple gun. This way you can get longer staples. And secondly, you could add a piece of wood to the back, and then that would also give you a way to mount this on the wall. Otherwise, like this, it'd be super cute to just prop up on a shelf. But I hope you guys enjoyed this project. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in my next video. Happy crafting!